Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Starfield has literally just released. We'll be going through some super optimized settings to get the most of your game while keeping it looking really good. This video won't go into Windows optimization at all. Instead, in the description down below you'll find Windows 11 optimization guide. This video is purely going to focus on optimizing Starfield, so that's where we'll begin. When you open up Starfield for the first time, you will see a shaders build at the very top of your screen. You'll need to wait for this to complete for the best possible performance. If there is a way to skip it, I wouldn't recommend doing so. When it eventually completes, hit any key to continue and we're on the main menu. So we'll begin by heading into settings followed by display and starting at the very top. We have borderless full screen as an option. It's either borderless full screen or windowed. There is no exclusive full screen, which is a little bit confusing as usually playing games with exclusive full screen gives you much better performance. But that's what we're working with currently. When you have borderless full screen enabled, which is what I would highly recommend, you aren't able to change the resolution. That's fine, we'll be keeping this to our native resolution anyways so that we're not wasting any extra power generating pixels we don't see, and the game shouldn't be needlessly blurry if the resolution is too low. So this is good. We'll skip over selected monitor and head straight to dynamic resolution. Now, a lot of articles and things like that recommend having this on, and while it could result in higher FPS numbers overall, there will be some weird stuttering and glitching between loading and unloading different texture changing qualities dynamically while you're playing the game. While it could be a good experience historically, it's not a good experience, so for that reason I recommend turning this off, just so we have a more stable overall frame rate that will customize further below. Then render resolution scale. By default this is set to 75% and it goes all the way between 100 and 50%. Why does it start at 75%? Well, for upscaling we have FSR 2 CAS and that's it. Surprisingly, no DLSS or NVIDIA options, though those may be coming in the future. Does it really matter? Usually not. AMD FSR2 gives brilliant results, and that's why we have chosen it as the default here. There should be practically no visible differences between 100% native resolution and 75% with FSR2. That's the default, and that's what I'd highly recommend you to keep it set to. Right below it, we have sharpening, which is by default set to 70%, and that's also a good number. Sharpening is definitely needed when you use any upscaling as it helps in the overall game look. But if you find that game appears too sharp, this is something you can come back and adjust. For me, I leave it on the default as that's probably good. These settings are recommended for everyone. What we'll do is we'll customize the settings in between here, which will really give us our FPS difference. First of all, VSync. Usually I turn it off as I don't get screen tearing, but the top and the bottom half of my screen don't match up. If you get any screen tearing while you're playing the game, enable VSync here, though do note you will increase your input latency. The graphics preset starts at custom with things optimized or at least set up for your graphics card of choice. I have an absolutely overkill graphics card. That's why it's gone for some super high options here, but there are a few I recommend lowering. As this is a cinematic game, shadows are something you're going to be paying more attention to as it's much slower paced. I wouldn't recommend going below medium here, otherwise it may become distracting. If you're really crawling for FPS, this is something you can lower, and that generally goes for all the options here. If you get to a point where the game is unplayable, lowering the settings as low they need to go. Certain options will have bigger impact compared to other options. Then indirect lighting. For this I recommend keeping this on high, as once again we could have navigating plans, and there will be lots of indirect lighting, light bounces, and things like that. These two quality options are probably at the very top as they'll have the largest impact on your gameplay, or at least perceived gameplay experience. If you are crawling for FPS, you can come back and lower this. As for reflections, this can comfortably lower to medium or even lower as there aren't going to be so many reflective surfaces that catch your eye too often. If you find that low is too distracting though, leave it on medium. For me, I leave it to low for a smoother, higher FPS experience. Particle quality, this is really situational. If you find that you're dropping FPS in certain areas, you'll need to lower this down to low. And also being said, because it's situational, you can comfortably leave this on low and it's not going to distract you pretty much at all during general gameplay. Volumetric lighting, once again cinematic game, I recommend keeping this on medium or even high if your PC can handle it. Medium gives you better FPS and very slightly quality impact compared to high. Ultra isn't really necessary unless you're rocking on overkill PC. Crowded density, this will mostly have to do with the CPU in your system for pathfinding and things like that. If you have a super powerful CPU, you can set this to medium or even high, and if you have a lower end system, set this down to low. That being said, medium is probably the highest that I would go. Setting this too high instead may impact your graphics card more as well. Having more NPCs loaded at the same time, I leave it on medium. Motion blur, this is pretty much your preference. The higher this option is, the more motion blur we should get and the better quality of motion blur is. I for one absolutely despise motion blur unless in certain situational games like maybe racing games for first person shooters and things like that. Motion blur really sets me off. That also being said, if you find you're easily made motion sick, especially by games, this is definitely something you should turn off. As for FPS impact, there shouldn't be a big one. GCIO quality is the ambient occlusion quality, and once again lighting, etc. This is something you'll want to keep on medium or high if you can for a better overall gameplay experience. Grass quality, because we'll be navigating large planets possibly with lots of grass. This can cost you FPS on certain planets and certain scenes more than others. Setting this to medium is a good starting point. If you find that grass doesn't really cost you a ton of FPS looking in certain locations, you can comfortably raise it. But then again, you're not going to be paying much attention to it. So medium or even low is probably good enough. Contact shadows, these aren't super noticeable as much as shadow quality in general. You can comfortably lower this down to the very low and without noticing too much differences. For a more cinematic experience, set this to medium or even high. We think we have gone through upscaling and sharpening. Finally, VRS. What is VRS? Well, variable rate shading basically allows your graphics card to render different parts of the image with different amounts of power, meaning that you'll end up with more smooth experience while you're playing the game. If you find that your system struggles with this on, which is going to be very situational from PC to PC, then you can turn it off. But I'd recommend leave it on for the better experience. Finally, film grain intensity. If you find the film grain distracting, you can lower this here. Usually when this is an option in games, it will set to maybe 0.5. I don't want to be drowned out by the film grain. Of course, if you are someone who's recording your screen or streaming, having film grain set to higher is going to cost you a ton more bitrate in your recordings and streams in order to keep the same quality. That being said, if your recording quality is already intensity high, leaving film grain when you post it on YouTube can result in even better looking streams. But that's a really outside tangent. Unfortunately, scrolling around on this menu will change options, so we'll need to move our mouse over to the far left and scroll down where we'll finally see enable depth of field. This is your preference. Personally, I don't enjoy a depth of field in many games, but I feel like in a game like this, it is going to improve the general experience, so I recommend leaving it on here. Now we can head back and that's pretty much it. We've gone through the most settings that it should result in a really good looking game in pretty good FPS. Obviously, the more powerful your hardware, the higher you can crank these options for a better looking experience, but also in a more cinematic focused games, so you don't exactly need to be pushing 160 frames. You should aim for somewhere around 40-50 FPS mark for the best possible looking experience and the best performing experience. I'm using an absolutely overkill system here, so I should be able to crank these settings up higher to reach that goal area just around 60 FPS, maybe 50, and the game should look incredibly good. If you'd like an FPS counter, do note that the game doesn't have one built in. Instead, you'll need to use something like the Steam overlay like I have in the extreme top left, or third-party software such as MSI Afterburner and RTSS. Also, not to mention, if you find that you're stuttering while you're looking around, motion blur is something that can help improve the feel of that. Without actually improving how much stuttering there is, it can help mask the stutteriness of looking around. Also on top of that, because we can't adjust the resolution of the game without turning off things like AMD FSR, what we'll need to do is adjust the resolution in Windows and then fire up the game after that. For example, you only really need to do this if you're on lower end hardware and you're trying to play the game on 4K or 2K monitor. But for the most part, you shouldn't need to worry about the resolution. Most noticeable in situations like this, if you're losing FPS, that will need to do with your particle actions. As for performance, it's actually really good. But of course, this is going to be incredibly demanding game. If you are playing at 2K, don't expect the highest FPS, but wow, does it look really good? That being said, resolution may be a thing that you need to lower. Anyways, thank you all for watching this very quick guide. Hopefully you find it useful and hopefully you enjoy Starfield. Thank you all for watching, and if you haven't so subscribe to my channel.